Violence against women continues to be pervasive, to take many different forms, from domestic violence to sexual violence at work, but also violations of their sexual rights and new forms such as cyber violence. All have the same goal: to silence women, maintain them in a subordinate place, maintain hierarchical roles between women and men. Violence against women is not abstract, and women are speaking out loudly about it.
How many more women and girls should be beaten, killed, and raped in this continent before decision makers and leaders in Europe find it so unacceptable that they are compelled to act? The time is now. It's overdue.
Male violence against women and girls remains endemic across societies in Europe. It permeates borders and cultures and institutions. The coverage obviously of the hashtag #MeToo has shown some extent of that, but I think we need to remember that campaign was started many years ago by Tamara Berg to help survivors in black and ethnic minority communities as part of the grassroots movement to call out violence against women and girls. After decades of raising awareness and advocacy, we see some important developments, as has been highlighted by Isabel and the Istanbul Convention. I think one of the most stark statistics is that today 50 women a week die from male domestic abuse in Europe. If we had that many women falling out of planes, we'd be doing something about it immediately. Why are we not taking more action now?
Women and girls on the move in particular. This is significant challenges and obstacles. Migrant women and refugees are faced with attack or rape as they move, and even when they are in the countries of destination. The whole issue of sexual exploitation and sexual harassment is indeed a worrying trend within the whole of Europe.
Online violence against women and girls is a reality. It's a gendered and prevalent phenomenon in Europe nowadays. It is part of the continuum of male violence, and it impacts on all women, and it perpetuates gender inequality. And that brings me to the impact and the consequences of online violence. A lot can be said about that also, but the short version is that, in fact, digital violence has the same consequences, the same impact as physical violence.
Women with disabilities are very much at risk of falling even further behind in the race towards more equal education and labour market participation, and particularly on the issue of gender-based violence. Nothing about us, without us, can be realized.
Women's rights are human rights, and we talk about men's violence against women. This is what we're talking about.
It's not possible to end violence against women and girls without involving girls and young women in those conversations.
Gender-based violence is violence committed to women and girls because they are women and girls. That is the whole thing.
Women's frontline NGOs, as those that make up the Observatory, have been at the forefront of fighting against violence against women for decades. Feminist organisations have been the first to denounce male violence, to set up shelters, helplines, and to lobby governments in order to get services and policy change.
The European Women's Lobby Observatory is a key instrument to get an overview of the reality of violence against women and girls in Europe, the positive developments, but also the burning issues and worrying trends, specifically with regards to the implementation of the provisions of the Istanbul Convention. The Istanbul Convention is an essential tool to bring change. It recognizes that violence against women is a human rights violation and a form of discrimination. As the Beijing Platform for Action, the Istanbul Convention states that violence against women is a manifestation of historically unequal power relations between men and women, which have led to domination over and discrimination against women by men, and to the prevention of women's full advancement. The Istanbul Convention establishes the due diligence principle, the state's responsibility to prevent, investigate, punish, and provide reparation for victims of different forms of violence against women and girls. It calls for adequate legislation and policies that will allow bringing back gender justice.
The Istanbul Convention puts in place a number of measures designed to ensure effective investigation and prosecution of crimes of violence against women. It also puts in place the training of frontline services and public policies to address, to ensure that health services as well have an understanding of violence against women.
The Istanbul Convention is very important too, and very fast indeed that clearly indicate, define, and outline the measures for the protection and prevention of migrant women and refugees. The Istanbul Convention clearly define and outline and indicate the gender-specific harm, which are specific to women, and women can be actually protected by this the convention to get automatic protection. You know, if they are actually victims of rape, victims of female genital mutilation, and any other form of violence against women, which is indicated in the convention itself.
In recent years, the Istanbul Convention has proven to be a valuable tool in the course of Germany's equality policy. On multiple occasions over the past years, we were able to refer to the Convention in order to fill the gaps with regards to the protection of girls and women affected by violence. And gradually, we closed these gaps. Germany welcomes the fact that the European Union also signed the Convention in June 2017.
First of all, a European coordinator, according to Article 10 of the Istanbul Convention, will be identified. She or he will have the responsibility to coordinate, implement, monitor and assess policies and measures adopted to prevent and repress any forms of violence, which is object of the Convention. Secondly, the ratification of the Istanbul Convention might be connected to the adoption of a code of conduct similar to the one elaborated at the time of the ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So nothing new, so it could be actually adopted. Another consequence of the ratification by the European Union would be the adoption of a strategy on preventing and suppressing violence against women and girls and domestic violence.
We think that action at EU level is strongly needed to put an end to this situation and ensure that every woman and girl living in Europe has access to justice and is protected and then can enjoy a life free from violence and free from the fear of violence. The European Women's Lobby and a vast coalition of allies and partners across civil society and trade unions, but also within member states and decision makers inside the European Parliament as well, are asking that the Council of the European Union and the member states ensure that the EU's ratification of the Istanbul Convention happens in the next months. We've heard that it can. We're optimistic that it will, and we will continue to keep pressure on the member states that that will happen. That the EU ratifies the Istanbul Convention with the broadest possible scope of EU competencies. We are confident that the next Bulgarian presidency and Austrian presidencies will put all their efforts into making sure that that happens, and we won't let them forget that, of course, that we expect that.
Moreover, it is vital to ensure that the demands set out in the Convention are implemented throughout Europe. This is the only way to achieve a uniform level of protection across Europe. For this to become a reality, as many members of the Council of Europe are possible must commit and accede to the Convention. It is sending a strong political system because we live in a common space of freedom, safety and law. Therefore, this space has to include the right of women and girls to live in safety and freedom, free of violence.
We have also asked the Commission to present a legal act, a directive on violence against women, recognizing that it is truly a cross-border crime and should be dealt as a cross-border crime, as the Istanbul Convention said.
Without the support from member states, from the Parliament, from the stakeholders, and from the other international institutions like Council of Europe, it will be very difficult to have the progress very soon. A little bit more than a year ago, Commission Europe launched the European Year on Focused Action on to ending violence against women. We have marked this one-year anniversary very recently, not only by orange colors that we've been covered all the European institutions and Anna Maria today personally.
I wanted to focus a little bit on exactly that, cooperation, partnerships, as we think is the only way really to get effective implementation of such a comprehensive and challenging treaty as it's the Istanbul Convention to implement it right on the ground. So at least 4 articles that talk about cooperation to get this effective implementation on the ground. Obviously, Article 9, I think, is the Bible for all the NGOs because all the parties need to recognize, need to encourage, and need to support your work on the ground as a really recognition of the importance of all the work that civil society does to prevent and prosecute violence against women.
And we also, I would like to say, really would like to continue to work with you, with the civil society. You are doing an amazing work.
Thank you very much. Actually, this is what we all would like to hear, that our cooperation, our long-standing cooperation will continue in our future. And really thank you.
How did I let him? If cops are the ones I try to avoid because of how fragile my being is in a country like this that can't wait to spit me out. How did I let him if my options are near death here or a certain death there?
As I was preparing for today, a song popped up in my mind, and that was a song at the start of the 70s that goes as follows. I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore. I know too much to go back and pretend.
Well, we demand loud and united, no more. We are half of the humanity. We want half of the future. This is the time to break the silence and disrupt the system permanently.